All right, so you all set?
I'm set.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to broadcast, and then I'm just going to wait a little bit for everyone to come in. Here we go. All right, so we'll get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Carrie, and I am part of the programming team at the Westport Library. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us for tonight's webinar, Build Confidence for Your Financial Future with Julina Ogilvie. Just a quick note before I introduce our speaker and turn it over to Julina. If you'd like to ask any questions at any point during the webinar, feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, not the chat. We're going to use the Q&A tonight for questions. So just to give you a little background, Julina Ogilvie is a wealth advisor and director of business development at Principal Wealth Partners, where she manages wealth for high net worth individuals and families, in addition to guiding successful advisors through the firm's succession planning strategy. A graduate of Colgate University and a certified investment management analyst, as well as a certified personal wealth advisor, Julina previously held executive roles at JP Morgan Asset Management and Lord Abbett and Company. In these roles, she used her extensive knowledge of the capital markets to educate the country's top advisors. Julina, a Fairfield resident, is an accomplished speaker and strategist who has presented wealth management concepts to thousands of professionals and clients. She is recognized for her outstanding achievements and acting as a mentor for young women entering the business. So it's great to have you here tonight, Julina. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it right over to you, and we'll get started.
Great. Thank you, Carrie, and welcome everyone to our event this evening. Especially during the holidays, I realize it's a very busy time of year. I am just so disappointed that we're still doing this via Zoom, but completely understand. And so I appreciate the time that you're spending with us tonight. Let me share my screen here first. And as Carrie mentioned, I am with Principal Wealth Partners. We are a financial services firm that's based here in Connecticut. I'm in Westport, but we also have offices in Madison and Old Saybrook. We work with a lot of successful individuals, families, really on track to achieve their retirement goals. Maybe they're in retirement, or maybe they have other goals along the way, such as education, building a business, et cetera. So really the foundation of this presentation was built on our client conversations. And one of the things that's not on my bio that I'll mention is I have a passion of trying to help women achieve empowerment around finance. I created a podcast, Women on Wealth, that is out there. And through that process, I interviewed a lot of women on what they wanted to talk about. So the event tonight was really to build a foundation around financial planning. And so I'll talk about that in a minute. The last thing I'll say is we are here and available as a resource. We do not charge fees for having consultations. So as you're going through the presentation, if you have questions and you want to reach out, please feel free to do so. We are here to be a soundboard or answer anything that we might be able to do, because I will say this, we are not going to be able to go through everything in the time that we have tonight. My goal is to be done at 6:45 and just allow some time for Q&A. So I'm sure there'll be some questions, but we'll get through as much of it as we can. So with that, let me talk about the agenda. What I want to do tonight is really focus on the first three key aspects of this page, which is briefly talk about what is a financial plan, right? What is it? Why is it important? And then I want to spend most of our time talking about the fundamentals. And the fundamentals really start with creating a budget, understanding debt, understanding savings. How do you start an investment process or maintain a successful investment process? And with all of this come emotions, because we are human. It is our nature to be emotional. And so we like to manage. We're big believers here at Principal Wealth Partners that we need to manage the emotions as we go along the way. And then I do want to finish with spending some time on prioritization. A lot of times people, when they think about investing and being successful in investing, they're thinking about stocks and bonds, not necessarily how they're investing. What is it in a corporate plan, like a 401k or 403b? Do you have access to an HSA? Are you utilizing an individual retirement account? And if you are on listening tonight and you're thinking about college education, benefits like a 529. So like I said, I'm not going to be able to go through in detail all of this, but we're going to cover as much of it as we can. So to get started, what is a financial plan? And I think in a very, very simple way, you want to understand where you are today. You want to think about where you want to be, and how to get there is creating a customized plan for you. So whether you're thinking about just retirement, or whether there's a lot of other goals along the way, like funding for college, buying a home, building a business, right? It's all about acknowledging those different phases of your life. What is the time horizon? How are you going to get there? And then from there, you can build the plan. I always joke that, many of us have not been on a vacation maybe in a while. I am supposed to be in Europe next February, and I don't know if we're going, but I laughed with my husband. I said, wow, I think we spend more time planning this vacation to Europe than many people even plan in planning for their retirement future. So the fact that you're on this is giving some indication that you have an interest. So thank you and kudos for that. So let's talk about why it's important. And I'm going to talk about 4 key aspects that we talk about a lot in the industry. The first is protecting what you build, right? And so it's not only crucial for you, but those that are dependent on you to have a financial plan. And when I say those that are dependent on you, a lot of times people are just thinking about maybe their kids. But we also know a lot more are focused on our parents. And so a lot of times the financial planning is now talking about the generation before us and planning with them in mind as well. So protecting what we have has become even more powerful from that standpoint. The onus is also more on us when you think about the decline in pensions that are out there. The fact that we have to be the one to create that pension, right? If we have access to a 401k, we actually have to contribute to that plan. And we're also, a lot of us are less reliant on Social Security. A lot of people are concerned that it won't be around for the younger generations. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but it really is more on us going forward than it's ever been before. Some interesting stats that I think are a little disturbing that are out there, but 40% of us have no emergency savings. 30% of us don't have a life insurance plan. 1 in 5 of us will be disabled at some point. And then 2/3 of Americans over the age of 65 need some type of long-term care service. So again, the earlier we start, the more successful we can be with this. Talking about longevity, I think a lot of people, most everyone knows that we're living longer, which is supposed to be a very good thing. The problem that we're having, and as an industry we get extremely concerned about, is the concern that we're just going to run out of money. So to think about it this way, if you look at life expectancy today, it has increased over the last 30 years by 5 years for women and 7 years for men. Now, women are still outliving men, but that gap is coming in. The average life expectancy now for a woman is 89.3. Again, it increased by 5 years over the last 30 years. And for men, it's 87.2. And then again, that was an increase of 7. Now, there's 2 big problems with what I just quoted to you. There's a problem with the averages. And number 1, is it just an average? And for us as financial planners, we don't want to live in that average, because that means 50% of us live beyond. And again, a huge concern that we hear about from our clients over and over and over again is, I don't want to run out of money. So we need to plan for arguably longer than that. And the other problem with the average is that it continues to increase. And so if it's moved by 5 years for women and 7 years for men over the last 30 years, I'm sitting here trying to think about what life expectancy will be for my daughter, who's 10, when she's my age. And so we need to continually focus on the fact that we're living longer, again, which is great, but that means that we need to have more of a plan in place for that as well. I'll also address lower returns. It's an interesting environment that we're in, because we had the longest economic expansion in US history and then the pandemic hit, and then we had the strongest growth ever coming out of it. And so we are expecting going forward from where we are today to have a slowing economy, not necessarily a recession, but it's going to slow down. We're talking about lower interest rates. We're in the lowest interest rate environment in US history. Even if rates move, they're not, how high are they going to go? So when you think about low growth and low rates, that has an impact on what your stock portfolio and your bond portfolio are going to do for the decades to come. So there's a lot of talk in the industry about, well, what do we do for clients that have been used to getting, let's call it 10% in the stock market, right? What if they're not getting that 10% going forward? Well, we need a plan for that. And so we want to put that into our assumptions in our plan. And then the last thing I'll mention, which is an interesting statistic, better results means more confidence. And what I mean by that is that studies show that if you have a plan, you have 2.5 times a higher net worth than those that don't have a plan. So again, it's creating the plan, sticking to it, and that gives more confidence, which gives you better results. So those are really the reasons that we think it's important. Let me move on and go back to the agenda. Like I mentioned, I want to spend most of our time talking about some of the fundamentals, because this is the foundation of how you build on this planning process. The first one, and if I could see all of your faces, I can only imagine the face that you would be giving right now, is talking about budgets. And so I mentioned my podcast, I call this the intimidating B word. No one wants to talk about budgets. No one wants to build a budget. You feel sometimes that you're inhibited when you have to have this budget, and we don't want it to be that intimidating word. It is incredibly important. And so this is a worksheet that, a very, very simple worksheet that I built. I'm happy to send it to you, but really focusing on what the industry calls this concept of 50, 30, and 20. It's a very simple way of building out the budget. So what does that mean? The 50%, what you're going to think about is you're going to think about your take-home income. After your tax, what does your paycheck look like? And you're going to allocate that to 50, 30, and 20% buckets. The 50% is the top, which are your needs, right? So when you think about everything that you spend in terms of your housing, your utilities, your groceries, about 50% of your take-home income should go into that needs bucket, right? That's the first piece. The 30% is the want, right? I always want to eat out more than eat in lately. Thinking in the pandemic, I don't think I got my hair done for a year. It's nice to go and be able to go to the salon and get your hair done, your nails done, go shopping, right? So these are all of your wants. I also would challenge my husband that Netflix, HBO, Prime Video that we have subscribed to since the pandemic, I think we belong to all of them now. That's probably a want, right? But that's 30% of your take-home income. And then finally, you have the savings, and the savings is the 20%. And the 20% is obviously the smallest piece of the three buckets, but it's arguably the most important. And the challenge that we find is so many people are focused on the 50 and the 30. They sometimes forget about the 20, because the 20 really is the saving, and that's for your long-term planning. And it's very easy sometimes in the moment when we're writing check after check after check and paying off bills, wanting to go to dinner, that we don't focus on the savings. And this is really the crucial part. And having an awareness of the 20% to the savings now is crucial. And I'll talk about that in a minute. It's okay to be over the 20% in your savings. That's fantastic. You really don't want to be that far under. The others, that's okay. But with the 20%, you want to make sure you're hitting that with your savings target. So that's what the industry calls the 50, 30, 20. Again, 50% is for your needs. The 30% are for your wants. And the 20%, the one that's always neglected, is for your savings. And again, I'm happy to share this with you if you'd like it later going forward. So moving on, let's talk about debt. And in my mind, when I think of debt in a variety of ways. I think that there's bad debt, but I also think that we can have good debt. And so understanding what we have in debt is critical And then being able to decide what maybe we have in debt that we should pay off, or what is good and healthy for us to keep. So I'll use two extreme examples. An example of bad debt is going to be going on a shopping spree, right? And using a credit card that has a double-digit interest rate that you need to pay off, versus your primary home, you have a mortgage, very low interest rate in today's environment. And oh, by the way, that asset that you own, your home, at least in this environment, the value seems to be going higher and higher. So I think of that as good debt. Because in that environment, if you're paying off your mortgage, I just refinanced my home in Fairfield, and my mortgage rate is 2.75. I think that's good, because I still believe that the markets, even though the return is going to be lower, is going to be better than 2.75. And I'm okay with that mortgage debt and keeping my opportunity invested in the market to generate a higher return. So, but really what you want to do, if you haven't gone through this exercise, is create a list of all of your outstanding debt, including your mortgages, credit cards, student debt. Line it out, look at what's outstanding, and then make sure you attach what the interest rate is on that debt. And then from there, you can prioritize, okay, this credit card is really high. I should prioritize paying that off first, meaning I should pay more than the minimum that it's asking for every month, and put that in your budget, right? And then that will be a consistent pattern to pay that off. The other thing we recommend, if you haven't done it, is to request a free copy of your credit card report. You want to make sure that you don't want to make sure that nothing's missing, but you also want to make sure that there's something there that shouldn't be. So it's always good to check that once in a while. And then finally, as I mentioned, if you have all these credit cards with this high debt, instead of maybe paying off the minimums, you can consolidate them and find something that has a lower APR, refinance. A lot of refinancing going on right now, especially in the housing market. Again, given where interest rates are, like I said, 2.75 is a lot lower than what I was in previously. So it's a great opportunity to, in this environment, to go in and evaluate your debt if you haven't done that yet. So I'll stop there with that piece. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about savings. And again, this is, when we talk about that budget and the 20% that should go in the savings, this is really, really crucial. This is a very, very simple graph, but I want to spend a little time here because this is the power of compounding. So the idea of compounding, it's funny, Albert Einstein actually called this the eighth wonder of the world. So think about it like a snowball effect. So the longer that you have in a time horizon to save, and the higher the return, the greater that snowball effect increases, as you can see by that blue line. So let me share with you what this is saying. So if you have $1,000 that you invest 40 years ago, and you invest it in, let's call it something very conservative, like a bond that gives you a 3% rate of return, that's that purple line. So that after 40 years, it results in $3,262. Then you take that $1,000 and you now invest it in something with a 6% rate of return. And you'll notice that as you start getting towards the end there, how that snowball effect starts to lift off of where that purple line is. You can see the gap is slowly increasing. And again, that's because as you're getting that return, it's compounding and reinvesting. And so now that 1,000 is worth 10,286. And then finally, you have that blue line. Let's call it great stock market for 40 years. It averages 10%. Would love that going forward. And now all of a sudden that $1,000 worth 45,259. So this is the power of compounding. And we're going to talk about the ways to save in a little bit, but I just want to give you an example. I was talking to a client the other day, and she said, I think I'm going to take $20,000 out of my IRA to refinish my kitchen. I said, that's great. But I don't think that that's going to cost you $20,000. I think it's going to cost you about $200,000. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, $20,000 today in your IRA, if you get, let's just assume an 8% rate of return, and you invest that for another 20 years, that $20,000 in 20 years is worth $200,000. And she said, oh, I never thought about that. And I said, oh yeah, and by the way, if you take that money out of your IRA, you're going to get taxed, and you also could be penalized because you're taking it out early. So this is the power of compounding. It's incredibly powerful. It's something that I'm trying to actually teach to my girls right now who are young and are just starting to save. This is one of the most powerful effects. If you have time on your side, please, please, please make sure that you utilize it. What comes with investing over a long amount of time is a lot of worry. And so this is something else that we talk about with clients all the time. Wall Street loves to call it a wall of worry. There is always a reason to be worried. There's always a reason to want to sell. When you invest in the stock market, so this is a graph of the stock market leaving the financial crisis of 2009 and now to where we are today. And the stock market, when you are invested in something that returns so well, never, ever, ever goes in a straight line, right? And so this gives you an idea of all of the things that we've been worried about since the financial crisis, which again, if you go back to my initial statement when we started this presentation, we had the longest economic growth with the most return off the S&P with the least amount of risk coming out of the financial crisis, coming into the pandemic. But yet, if you look at all of the blurbs that are on this graph, you had reason after reason after reason to worry and say, wow, I wonder if I should actually pull my money out of the market. And this is where the emotion comes in. So it starts all the way on the left-hand side in March of 2009 with GM and Chrysler filing for bankruptcy, right? If you remember the financial crisis. Then you had the flash crash. S&P downgrades their US debt. Fiscal cliff, US government shutdown. We had an Ebola virus in 2014. Earnings recession, market went up. Brexit, market continued to go higher. Not saying it didn't dip, but you can see clearly that the markets continue to go. So we believe a lot in behavioral finance, which is people tend to allow their emotions to create decisions when it comes to their financial behavior. We are always going to have that. We will continue to have that. And we want to be aware of that when we are making our investment decisions. And so I do joke sometimes that financial advisors, financial planners are more psychologists to some of the clients than others, because there's a lot of hand holding to say, it's going to be okay. We're invested for the long term. So the emotions are incredibly important. And just to kind of hammer this a little bit more, this is how much we believe in this, is we look a lot at what's the impact of being out of the market, right? Because people are always looking to try and time this. And if this is an amazing study that if you look going back over the last 20 years, the S&P has actually returned 7.5%. That's the bar all the way on the left. And this study ended in 2020. It's not including this year, but very similar point. So it says, well, all right, well, what happens if you decide to take your money out of the market and you missed 10 days in the last 20 years, just 10, the 10 best days in the last 20 years, your return is not 7.5%, but it now drops in half to 3.35 just by missing 10 days. And then you take it even further and say, well, what if I missed an average of one day each year for the last 20 years, the 20 best days over the last 20 years? And again, now your performance drops to less than 1%. And it doesn't take long to find, as you move towards the right of the page, that by missing some of the best days in the market over the last 20 years, you now don't have 7.5%, you have a negative return in your portfolio. So it occurs very quickly based off these emotions. And the last thing I'll mention on that is that history has proven, this is a very famous Dalbar study in the industry. This one ends in 2019. I have been watching this study for 24 years. I have not seen it change. The average investor is the orange bar all the way on the right relative to all the other asset classes on the graph. So starting with your real estate investment trusts that have returned about 11.6% for the last 20 years. You look at high yield bonds, which are lower quality corporate bonds returning 7.9. You'll notice the S&P is in green at 6.1%. The average investor is all the way to the right at 2.5%. And to me, this is mind-boggling because we are now in an era of technology where I'm sitting here in my office. I've got two screens. You can't see it, but I've got my laptop over here. I've got my iPad over here, and I have my cell phone behind me. We have constant information at our fingertips. And yet, as humans, we are emotional and we continue to allow our behavior to get in the way. And that unfortunately results in very poor performance. So we want to take control of this emotion, if I haven't beaten that point yet in this conversation. So moving on. So let's talk a little bit about investing. And we get a lot of questions from individuals all the time is, well, what stocks do you like? And that's great. What do you think of Bitcoin? That's a popular one. And I think that's fantastic that people want to participate. I would suggest that if you're new to investing, you want to take a step back and focus on some of the fundamentals first. And so I talk about this all the time, maybe because my girls are 10 and 12 and they bake. So I compare this a lot to investing is like baking, right? It's about understanding some of the fundamentals of how you're going to bake something that you're successful with. So when you think of it that way, your ingredients when you bake, right, are extremely important. It is the same thing in investing with asset selection. So when you look at this quilt chart here, there's a lot on this page. Every color represents a different asset class. The S&P is your large company US stocks. That's the green box running along the page. On the flip side, you have your cash, which is purple. And then, emerging markets, which are your Brazils, your Chinas, your Indias, those are your light purple. So the reason it looks like such a random quilt chart is that it starts back in 2006 and it moves across every calendar year, the highest performing asset class at the top and the worst performing at the bottom. And I always joke, if you can find a pattern on this page, please tell me. But most often what you find is what is the top of the page can very quickly end at the bottom of the page. So very obvious if you start all the way on the left-hand side, 2007, prior to the financial crisis, emerging markets were the most successful place to invest. It was almost a 40% return. Financial crisis hits and they all of a sudden drop 53%. And then, oh, by the way, in 2009, they turn out to return 79%, right? And so it's very hard to pick these boxes and decide how you're going to be successful with them. So what we always talk about is just like when you have ingredients for baking, is you're going to have a little bit of everything. That is the white box, which is running down the middle of the page. It's owning a little bit of everything. And by having that, you're never the winner, but you're never the loser. And so we believe a lot in what's called asset allocation and how you invest in each of these pieces. But I guess the analogy I would use is I spent a lot of time driving into Manhattan for years. And I always joked, if you were told that you had to drive over the GWB with no guardrails, right, where would you drive? And I think most people would say, I would prefer to drive down the middle. So, and again, this is your investing strategy for your long term, right? This is for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. And this is the foundation of investing. The other piece that's important is time and temperature, right? Just like in baking, you have to have an attention to how long you're going to put it in, what that temperature is going to be. It's the same thing with investing. And so this is going to create that balance of return and risk in your portfolio. If you are investing for the next year and you plan to buy a home in a year, right? You don't want to be invested in 100% in the stock market, right? Because it's too much risk relative to your time horizon. However, at the same time, if you are investing for a 10-year horizon for something out there, then you can have more exposure to stocks. And again, you go back to the quilt chart that I just showed you, and you invest a little bit in everything. So this is a very, very big discussion and consideration is you need to think about what will I need and when, and that will help create the balance of your asset allocation for you. And finally, what that results in is your asset allocation overall. And that would help decide, okay, what are my measurements for everything, right? So now we've talked about the ingredients, we talked about time and temperature. But what's the measurement going to be of each of those? We know that having too much salt in when you bake could be detrimental. So it really is this question. This is called the efficient frontier in the industry, where all the way on the left-hand side, it shows if you're invested 100% in cash, you're going to have the lowest return, but you're also going to have the lowest risk, right? That can be incredibly powerful for a very short-term time horizon. The longer your time horizon is, the more aggressive, and you can move out on that frontier, and you can put more in stocks. So it shows that the darker colored blue is increasing your stock exposure as you move out from the bond allocation, and you can see your return is getting higher, but your risk is also moving out as well. And so that's always the fine balance, right? Everyone wants the high return. They of course don't want the downside. They don't want that risk. And so it's a question of finding the balance that fits you for your time horizon and that ultimate goal. So I hope that's not too cheesy of an analogy. But again, I think it fits very appropriately when it comes to investing. It's about finding the selection, what you're going to invest in. It's talking about the time and temperature. What is your time horizon? What's your risk measurement from that? And then that helps create your measurement or your asset allocation into stocks, into bonds. This is a very simple pie chart, but most firms, financial advisors, they would break it down further and say, okay, what types of bonds, what types of stocks, international, large company, small company, are they value, dividend paying stocks? Are they growth? So, I don't want to get in the weeds, but this is the foundation of where it starts. Okay. So we moved on, and this is great because I want to give myself some time to talk about prioritizing. And this is an interesting conversation because, again, when a lot of people talk about investments, they're thinking about return. Outside of opening a brokerage account, Fidelity, Schwab, and buying stocks and Bitcoin or whatever you wanted it, I want to transition this to talk about other options that can create an optimal result for your investments. And so we're going to talk about how you bucket your investments. And so in this scenario, and I realize not everyone on this webinar will have access to all of this, but if you have access to a corporate plan, 401k, 403b, how do you utilize that? It's what's become very popular. If you are in a high deductible plan is HSA. We can talk about the benefit there if you have access to it. IRA, everyone has access to an individual retirement account if you're still working. And then finally, 529, if you're trying to think about education for either your kids or maybe your grandkids, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about that. This is a prioritization hierarchy, just to give you an idea. And so if you start at the very bottom and we go back to the concept of budgets, and I also mentioned in the very beginning of this presentation that most don't have an emergency savings account. Before you do any investing, you want to start there. You want to make sure you have an emergency savings account. And usually what we say is it should be 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. And that 3 to 6 months can vary based on a lot of things. If you only have one income generator in your home, you would want that to be probably on the higher end, 6 months, versus if you have maybe dual income in your home, maybe you can lower it. There's a lot of considerations, but you want to make sure you have that emergency reserve. We all know that these emergencies come up, especially if you own a home. You want to be able to address that. You want to address it without stress and without having to tap into what you have already deemed to be your longer term savings for whatever it may be, such as retirement. So make sure you have that emergency savings first. From there, we always recommend you want to take a look at what you have available if you have an employer, if you have a corporate plan, and if you have an HSA. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Number 4 is paying off that higher interest rate, paying off that bad debt that we talked about. You want to make sure that you address that as well in the hierarchy. And then after that, you can start thinking about maximizing in other ways. One of them is to go back. We're going to talk about this, but we're going to go back to your corporate plan, your HSA. Can you put more money in than you already have? there's considerations there, but probably even more important is go to number 8, which is, do you want to consider an IRA? And you definitely want to consider an IRA if you don't have access to those corporate plans. That's your individual retirement account. And we'll touch a little bit on that. And then lastly, you can open that brokerage account. That's a taxable account. So that you're going to be taxed on that very differently. And so this prioritization is very important because of the way you're taxed in these different accounts. And I'm pretty sure everyone that is listening to this right now is very aware that we live in a high tax area. There's been a lot of concern with the administration on how taxes are going to change. It wasn't as bad as we thought it would be, but we still candidly live in a low tax rate environment relative to historical numbers. And so a lot of us are talking about, well, what happens when taxes do go up? So that makes these other strategies that we're talking about even more compelling. So let's talk about that a little bit. I want to just address the benefit of a corporate plan. This is a very, very simple chart, but I just want to focus on the visual because what the benefit that you have, if you have access to, let's say, a 401k, is that this grows tax-free, right? When you have a taxable account and you have your investments that pay out capital gains, we're in capital gain season right now. A lot of mutual funds and ETFs have paid out capital gains. They're paying income. You're taxed every year on that in your account. The benefit of a corporate plan is that it grows tax-free. And in many of these plans, the reason it was in the prioritization chart twice is that if your plan matches your contribution, you absolutely want to benefit from that because you're just getting more money in your bucket. So the example here is that if you are in a corporate plan that is matching 5% of your salary and you're putting that in, you can see the growth here on this line. So the blue at the bottom is showing you, if you start at age 25, you retire at age 65, and your starting salary is $50,000. So we're really, we're starting really as you're building your career. Your company is matching 5%. That 5% matches the light blue relative to what you as the employee put in. So you can just see it, that automatically doubles. And then again, going back to that power of compounding that I talked about over time, it's even more powerful. That gray line shoots up even faster because you're not getting taxed on it every year. And notice that gray and all that growth is a combination of the foundation of the light blue and the dark blue. So this is very, very powerful. So if you have access to that corporate plan, you absolutely want to make sure that you benefit from it. HSA, very similar. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it because not everyone has availability to an HSA, but when you're enrolled in a high deductible health plan, please take a look at it. Many of us are aware of FSA programs where you can invest in your long-term health savings by deducting from your payroll. Unlike an FSA, which is a spend it or lose it at the end of the year, this actually becomes an investment vehicle for people. You can accumulate these assets, you don't lose it, and you can invest in these assets and they grow for you tax-free. Not only do they grow for you tax-free, but this is really the only bucket that I know of that's triple tax-free, meaning it's deducted from your payroll. You're not taxed when it goes in. It grows tax-free. And when the money comes out, if it's dedicated to your healthcare expenses, you don't pay taxes. So again, if you can find other things that are triple tax-free, let me know, but this is a great vehicle to access and have an opportunity if it's available to you. So I will move on from that, but just know that it's there and happy to send more details if anyone's interested. The last piece that I want to mention is in the priority ladder is the IRA. Because again, most of us still have access to this. Again, if you have earned income or your spouse does, and there's a lot of confusion around the IRA today. It really does fall into 3 different types of IRAs. And I'm not including if you're in a self-employed, like a SEP IRA or a simple IRA. This is just an individual retirement account. And really what varies is going to be based off of your income. but very plain and simple. This year, you can contribute into an individual retirement account $6,000. Unless you're over 50, you get an additional 1,000. So 6,000 for under 50, 7,000 over. They all grow tax-free. The difference is really what your salary is. And based on that, it's going to tell you if you're going to be taxed going in, or if you're going to be taxed coming out, or possibly if you're in a higher salary bracket, you may be taxed on both. However, it still grows tax-free. So there's still a very, very, whether you're taxed, if you're taxed going in and coming out, there's still a huge benefit on it growing tax-free during the course of its, that you're growing the IRA. But this is something that creates a lot of confusion. You can have a corporate plan, you can be enrolled in your 401k, you can contribute, and you can still contribute to your IRA. So again, a lot of questions around that, but extremely important to think about that when you're trying to fill that 20% savings of your budget. This is an important piece that can really accumulate for you over time. And then finally, I wanted to just address the benefits of a 529. This again is a great consideration for anyone with children, grandchildren that are looking for efficient ways to save for college. If maybe you're a grandparent on this call, this is a great estate planning tool when people are starting to think about how can I get assets out of my estate, and then gifting in the format of a 529 is a great opportunity there. So, but this is an example. I'm going to focus just on the green bar and the purple bar. Another example of how the benefit of growing tax-free. So this is starting with $10,000 and you put $500 a month into the plan and you have it for 18 years. So in this example, the investment's returning 6%, and you're in a 32% tax bracket. So the investment's not changed. The timing hasn't changed, your contributions haven't changed, but again, depending on the bucket that you're in, the value changes dramatically. So if you invest the strategy I just mentioned, $10,000, $500 a month, returning 6% for 18 years in a taxable account, that's the green bar, and your net worth at the end of this investment is $172,000. Now, again, you do the same exact thing, but you put it in a 529, which grows tax-free. You have now generated almost 48,000 more in assets in this 529. And that could possibly be an entire year of college education for a child. Depends on where you're going to go, but very, very powerful tool, and an important consideration if this is part of your needs. So I'm going to go back to sort of my agenda here, as if we didn't go through a lot very quickly. I didn't touch on the estate planning. However, I will mention that once you kind of get through all these steps, as you continue, because the financial planning every year evolves, you build on it and you build on it, you change it, our lives change, you need to adjust it. You want to also think about how you're going to distribute, right, your assets, and that can be very critical. So you need to think about wills, power of attorneys, life insurance, possibly a trust. Do you want a gift? So all of these are great topics that we have scheduled for kind of a financial planning sort of next step. But I wanted to at least address if you need to talk to a financial planner or an attorney, these are all great conversations to have with them and address. So in summary, I will say that I think it's more critical than ever to develop a plan and customize it to you, whether it's your budget, analyzing your debt, understanding your investments and how you're going to invest in different buckets. Our circumstances change over time, as they should. And it's important not only once you develop it, but you need to monitor it and then adjust it accordingly. So it is it's an evolving plan. It's definitely not, a lot of times people will say, oh, can I just have you run me a financial plan and then I'm all set. It's a great start, but the monitoring and the adjusting are just as crucial. And so hopefully this at least gives you that first step, if you haven't done it, to think about ways to start implementing that plan and then finding ways to monitor and adjust it going forward. Like I said, I'll put up my information here. We're happy to answer any questions. that you may have from the presentation tonight. Anything that I didn't address, I realize I am just scratching the surface, but we're here for you, and we're happy to take your call or your email. So 6:44. Carrie.
Yeah, that was great. You are right on the mark. Wow.
I'm from New Jersey. I can talk really fast, so I apologize.
Awesome. I'm from New Jersey too, so that's perfect. We do have one question actually.
Okay.
So the question is, what would you recommend for someone who is risk adverse and will retire in 8 years? Can you do a 401k and also an IRA, or something else you would, or is there something else you would recommend?
Yeah,
this came out during the investment piece.
Yeah, I'm wondering, it sounds like there's two questions in here, because one is utilizing a 401k and an IRA if you're retiring. You absolutely can. I think it depends on where they are at that phase. Do you think you're there and you have enough to retire, or do you want to keep accumulating in that format? We actually have clients that are taking distributions from their IRAs that are still working, and they continue to contribute as they're taking their required distributions out. So I think it depends on where you are, and I'm happy to walk through that with anyone to get a better idea of what that means. And then the other question is, this comes up a lot, right? Risk averse in this environment today is very difficult, because we know that the CDs and the money markets are paying virtually nothing. If you have money invested in a CD, $100,000 right now, you're generating $200. You're not even keeping up with inflation. Very different. I remember back in 1997, I got married. I had my wedding fund in a CD, and it was a 6-month CD. It paid 5%, right? That $100,000 can generate $5,000 in income. And I'm not saying that that's what I had in my wedding CD, but we're in an environment where we cannot rely on cash in our retirement years. And so there's other ways we have this conversation a lot with clients. Is it okay? Well, how much risk can we take to get you something and make sure that you're still on track for your goal? And so there are ways to do it, but the industry in general is challenged by this. We have to step out a little bit more than we have in the past to get our clients the income and the returns that really can beat inflation and help with the goals. I hope that answers a little bit.
Yes. And so she's following up and saying that totally makes sense, but is there something you would suggest? Is there a particular type of investment you would suggest, or do you have a preference?
Yeah, it's a good question. For us, we build very diversified bond portfolios and they're not, when I say diversified, we can't rely on treasuries, right? Because they're very interest rate sensitive. They're not paying anything. So we try to get high quality corporate bonds. We try to focus on lower maturity bonds that are not going to be as interest rate sensitive. Depending on their risk, maybe we'll look at lower quality bonds to give us a little bit more yield, but without stepping into the stock market. So we kind of build that stepping ladder to say, okay, how far, if this is cash and this is stocks, how far out can we go depending on what you're looking for? And so we look at different types of bonds and to see what can get us there. And so our bond portfolios are very diversified. We use active managers because we believe the credit selection in this environment is crucial. We look at the municipal bond market as well as the taxable, again, depending on which bucket you're looking to invest in.
Great. And thank you. She said thank you. So that was great. Thank you for that.
Thank you for the question.
So are there any other questions? Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box if there's anything else that's come up from anyone. Back on. Looks like you have answered.
I've answered everything.
All questions. all of the questions have been answered. I mean, that was an extremely thorough presentation, so I'm not surprised. So for those of you watching, Julina's info is up on the screen still. Feel free to, as she said, contact her directly if you have any additional questions. That was excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And perhaps we can have you back here to kind of dive into some of those categories in a little more detail. We would really love that.
Yeah, please follow up with Carrie if there's certain topics you think we can do a deeper dive in. We're happy to do that. And I appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you enjoy the holiday season.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everybody for watching. We really appreciate it. This program has been recorded, so if you missed anything, if you'd like to go over anything Julina has talked about, it's going to be up on our library YouTube page probably next week. So you can always check in with me at the library, and I'm happy to send you the link as well. So thank you again. I hope you have a happy holidays, and hope to have you back here soon. Julina, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carrie.
Bye.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night, everybody. Thanks so much.